SALT for short, is an informal discussion group. We've been going for about 20 years now, and we meet twice a month here at SAGE, second and fourth Tuesday, and discuss topics of current interest, not limited to seniors issues, although that's the thing we know most about. And the subtext is that we're interested in promoting a civil society. And in a nutshell, that's a society in which the voters are all well informed. Each of our principal speakers this afternoon is going to get 10 minutes to give us their position or their take on the principal question of does Alberta have a spending or a revenue problem. We start with Professor McMillan, who is here as our independent expert. Thank you for coming. And he is going to give us an introduction to the issue. Those of you who read the editorial page of today's Edmonton Journal will know roughly what he's going to say. The other speakers will present their party's position and only their party's position. In other words, no sniping. And that would be in keeping with the civil society, of course. We regret that we were unable to get anyone from the Wildrose party, and so Carol has prepared a very brief slideshow which will give the Wildrose's Glasgow position. After these, the politicians have had their say, Professor McMillan will get 5 minutes to do a summation. Then we're going to have a short break. I think by then everyone will want to stretch their legs. And then we'll have questions and comments from the audience. Each question or comment will be limited to 90 seconds, and we have a timekeeper over here. And you're limited to one question until everybody's had their turn, and if we run out of time before we get to that, then I'm afraid that's too bad. And the meeting will end at 4 o'clock sharp, because SAGE wants us all out of the building by 4:30. Now, on the format procedure, are there any questions at all? The floor is yours.
Nice to be here. These kinds of forums are really critical, and an informed electorate is what is absolutely essential for good decision making by on government policies and public policies. So very happy to be here, and I hope I have a few words to say that might be helpful. I got interested in this topic, particularly after 40 years or plus of being a public finance economist. I got really interested in this question about a year ago, after the provincial budget was announced, and trying to sort out what was going on in the budget and why was it figured the way that it is. So I've done this before, and some of you have seen this, and today's journal preempted me by a day probably and told you what my punchline is, so if I miss anything, you can probably pick it up there. What you do get here is that you get all the pretty pictures that are behind that discussion that was in the journal. Okay, in approaching the topic, what I thought, perhaps what we can see is that if we look at some historical patterns, we may be able to find trends or characteristics that tell us something about what the nature of the problem is. Do we have a spending problem, or do we have a revenue problem? And if you're going to look at a period of time, lots of things change. Population changes, prices change, incomes change, and so that complicates the whole picture. What I've done here is that I've looked at, I think everything that I'm showing you is relative to personal incomes in the province, that is, revenues and expenditures relative to personal incomes. So it incorporates these kinds of changes as we go along. Starting with expenditures, please. Okay, this is Alberta program expenditures as a percentage of personal income. And what we look at here, this is 1981-82, and it goes to 2011-12 here. These are the fiscal years. And to give you some orientation to this, I have put in the various premiers: Lougheed, Getty, Klein, Stelmach, and Redford. And what you find is that the program expenditures, this is a measure of the cost of providing the goods and services that Albertans get from their government. So this is from the provincial government. And you go back to the Lougheed years, and it's very high. These were great years for government. Lots of natural resource revenue, and expenditures were about a third of personal incomes, the equivalent of a third of personal incomes. Then natural resource revenue started to decline. Premier Getty had to cut back, incurred debt, quite a bit of debt actually. And the crisis kind of came when the Klein government came in and really cut back on expenditures. But what is most interesting here is that for the last 20 years, the Alberta government has provided about 20%, or the equivalent of 20% of personal incomes as expenditures on goods and services to the people of Alberta, okay? And this is financed in a variety of ways. But this 20% is really what we're looking at here, plus or minus a little bit. Okay, is 20% big or small? Is that too big or is it too little? That seems to be consistent. Well, one way of looking at this is to say, what are the decisions that are being made in other provinces? And in other provinces, we see this is the ratio of program expenditures as a percentage of personal incomes again. And this is the 10-province average. And you can see that the 20% figure is quite characteristic of what has been going on in other provinces, at least up until 2006. After 2006, that percentage goes up, and it's almost 25% at the last year for which I had data. And but Alberta, on the other hand, is continuing along at about the 20% level. So we seem to be quite comparable for most of this period of time, or lower, for in terms of the relative size of provincial government expenditures. Okay, Albertans have relatively high incomes, so perhaps even though we're spending a relatively consistent percentage, we may be providing a high level of per capita expenditures, okay? So that in fact is not the case. Yes, it was true in the Getty and the Lougheed years, we were #1 per capita in per capita spending of the provincial governments. But since 1993-94, the Alberta government has never been #1 in per capita spending, program spending, okay? And in fact, we've ranged between #2 and #7, an average 4.2 over that period of time. So we have not been the highest per capita spender by any means during the last 20 years. So, relative expenditures look like pretty much like what they are in other provinces. Absolute expenditures per capita seem to be fairly consistent with what is in other provinces, are not unusual. Hard to see that expenditures are the problem. What about the revenue side? Okay, this is non-natural resource owned revenues. That's quite a mouthful. What does it mean? Well, it means that I'm not looking at transfers from the federal government, which are non-trivial, but not all that large. But the really important thing that we're not looking at is natural resource revenues. We're excluding natural resource revenues. So what we are looking at are primarily taxes. Personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, education taxes, alcohol and fuel and tobacco taxes, a whole bunch of licenses and fees and charges, and also some revenue from investments, particularly that in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. So This is mostly revenue that is coming out of Albertans' pockets, okay, as opposed to natural resource revenues. Now you see that for much of this period of time, that has been about 17%, and as of 2000, it starts to decline. So let's look at this latter period a little more closely. And so here we're looking at non-natural resource owned revenue and program expenditure as a percentage of personal income. So we're looking from 1994-95. This red line is the expenditure per capita. The blue line is what we were just looking at, the revenue per capita from non-natural resource revenues and own source revenues. So here we find that in the late 90s, we were spending about, or the source of revenue was about 17% of personal incomes. It gradually goes down, and the last 3 years, it's been 12.25%. Okay? So it's gone down almost 5%, or the exact number is it's gone down 28.5% relative. This is 28.5% smaller than that. Okay? So there's been a considerable drop in the contributions that Albertans make out of their own pockets to the cost of providing goods and services within the province. Let's see. Okay, so what are the plans for the future? You can go on one more. Good. Okay. This is the future as it appeared 1 year ago. Okay? Just at the time of the provincial budget, a year ago. Okay? So the provincial government's plans are looking 3 years ahead. So I'm looking and saying, okay, what is the province planning for the next 3 years? And the first thing to know is that we're not going to be rescued by natural resource revenues. The expectation is that we're not going to get natural resource revenues high enough to really save the day, so to speak, okay? So they're not going to fill up this gap. And this gap in here has largely been filled by natural resource revenues. From here to about here, we had a real natural resource boom. It generated a lot of revenue. We saved a lot of that in our sustainability fund, almost $17 billion. But after the financial crisis in 08-09, we've run deficits ever since then. So what has happened is that the province has eroded that sustainability fund from 17 billion to about 2.5 billion, and we've gone into debt besides. So we're taken our savings account for emergencies and spent it almost all, and we've borrowed. So the natural resource revenues over the next 3 years are not going to save us. There's not, we can go on to the next slide. Whoops.
Is that the
No,
one?
back of it. That one will do. Here is the non-natural resource own source revenue. That is going to be stable at about 12.25%, so that we're not going to generate any extra revenues. But what is happening is that we're going to cut expenditures. Expenditures are going to be reduced from here about 19% to an average of 17.5% during this period of years. So what is happening is that natural resource revenues are not going to increase much. Revenues from other sources, from taxes and so on, are not going to increase. And expenditures are going, the government is looking at this issue as an expenditure problem, and we're going to solve the problem by cutting expenditures. It doesn't really solve the problem, but it's going to reduce the problem. So the interesting thing is that natural resource revenues are the lowest that they have been in 35 years. Not this non-natural resource revenue, own source revenue, is also the lowest level in 35 years. And expenditures are also, in terms of relative to personal income, the lowest level that they will have been in 35 years, lower than even during the Klein cuts. So, do we have a revenue problem or an expenditure problem? That's to be sorted out.
Shall I just go ahead?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciated the presentation. I enjoyed the article in the Journal this morning because I think it shone a light on some of the issues that we're grappling with today. And in particular, it was interesting to see the figures that show that we actually spend less on public services as a percentage of our personal incomes than they do in many other provinces. And I think that was, I think, a bit of a revelation. So I would like to put a little bit of political meat on the bones that Professor McMillan has laid out for us. And I want to go back to the last budget. And you may remember a year ago, the Premier came on television and told us about this bitumen bubble that had created a great deal of problems. And of course, the government, the Progressive Party in the election, had made extravagant promises, which by our calculations totaled about $7 billion of new program expenditures. And the bitumen bubble was to explain why very few of those promises would be kept, and how instead of expanding public services, we were actually going to see a reduction in many areas. So what we saw is $180 million taken out of prescription drugs for seniors, nearly 45% cut to community access for persons with developmental disabilities, $147 million cut to post-secondary education, perhaps one of the deepest cuts, ending the student temporary employment program, which many young people depended on, and which not-for-profit organizations depended on in order to be able to employ people. We've also seen an increase in school fees. Underfunded municipalities have to raise property taxes to keep up. We have unregulated electricity prices, which are amongst the highest in the entire country. So why do we need to do this in a province as wealthy as Alberta? And I think the answer to this comes back to a couple of very important decisions that were made when Ralph Klein was the Premier of the province. The first was made when Stockwell Day was the provincial treasurer, and he decided to get rid of the progressive income tax and impose a flat tax. And that's a very interesting result because it cost the province probably about $2 billion of revenue a year. But as Dr. McMillan has pointed out, at that time, we had a windfall of natural gas royalties. The natural gas royalties were very high, the price was high, and at its peak it was bringing in about $8 billion a year. So nobody noticed when the government cut taxes for the very wealthiest amongst us. Not only did it cost us money, but it shifted the burden of the taxation onto the middle class. They increased the exemption for low-income individuals, but they also increased tax rates. And if I can just find it, I'll give you some examples. Here it is. They shifted the burden of taxation onto the middle class. So, for example, an Albertan with an income of just $70,000 a year pays $1,434 more than they would in British Columbia in taxes, and $919 more than they would in Ontario. But an Albertan with a taxable income of $1 million will pay $41,095 less than they would in British Columbia, and $75,157 less in provincial tax than they would in Ontario. So you can see the impact of this. It's done two things. It's cut taxes for very wealthy people and shifted the burden to middle-class people, and it's cut the provincial revenues. But it was temporarily not noticeable because of the natural gas prices and royalties at the time. The second thing they did when Steve West became the treasurer of the province was to announce a plan to cut taxes on profitable corporations from 15.5% at that time to a target of 8%. So in other words, cutting corporate taxes in half. Now, keep in mind that only corporations that are making a profit pay this tax. It's paid only on the profits that they make. So they've accomplished that over a period of time. They're down now to about 10%. So again, about a third of corporate income tax revenue was given up, but we had this natural gas royalty revenue to make up for it. Now what's happened is that there's a lot of natural gas, and the prices have come down. And the royalty revenue just isn't there anymore. What used to be $8 billion a year is now around $1 billion a year. So what it means is that we are now paying, in terms of program expenditures in the province, about 20, I think 20% is the number, of our program expenses are paid for out of royalty revenue. But of course the remaining royalty revenue is very volatile. It's like a roller coaster, it goes up and down. And so because we're overly dependent on this very volatile source of revenue to pay for our programs, whenever the price of oil goes down, we have to lay off nurses and teachers. And that just isn't good enough. That's not how it should be. In fact, I'll go farther and say that the royalty revenue that we get on our natural resources just doesn't belong to us. It belongs to all generations of Albertans. And for us to spend it on ourselves, on our own programs, because we want lower taxes, means that, in fact, we're stealing from future generations. So that money should be saved, that money should be invested. But we need to make sure everybody pays their fair share. And if they do, we can afford to maintain our programs even when the price of natural gas or oil goes up or down. And I think that that's a very important objective that we need to pursue. I also believe that it's very important that we plan more effectively for this revenue. Alberta, under social credit, collected only about 10% of the value of our natural resources, our non-renewable natural resources, oil and gas, in the form of royalties. Only about 10% of the total value came to the owners of the resource, which is the people of Alberta. Under Peter Lougheed, there were two major increases in royalties, and he set as an objective to capture 30% of the value of oil and gas for the owners, that is us. And he accomplished that goal. In fact, in a couple of years, he even exceeded it. Now, since that time, under Mr. Klein and subsequently Mr. Stelmach and Ms. Redford, that percentage has declined to 9% of the value of the natural resources is captured for the owners. In other words, less than under social credit. So this stems, in my view, from the very close integration of the oil industry and the progressive conservative government in this province. And the relationship is far too cozy. The financial relationship to the Progressive Conservative Party's fundraising is very close. And we need to be also very careful about the Wildrose Party, which also gets a very significant amount of funding from the oil and gas industry. In fact, it was Stelmach's minor attempt to tweak royalties that made the oil industry angry enough that they started funding the Wildrose Party in a significant way, and that is directly related to its rise to a major opposition party in the province. They're still funding the Wildrose Party significantly more than they're funding the Progressive Conservative Party. So we need to follow the money, we need to look very closely at those sorts of relationships if we're going to understand why certain decisions are made. Why is it that we should get our drug coverage as seniors, for example, cut, or students would have to pay through the nose for tuition fees for post-secondary education, or persons with disabilities get their programs paid in order to keep taxes as low as possible for the richest people in the province. That's not right, that's not fair, and that's certainly not the New Democrat view of how things should be done. So the problem is that we can't just wait for another increase in oil and gas prices so that we can get our drug coverage back, or get our improvement to frontline health care. We need to find a way to make sure that that happens regardless of the prices of our natural resources. And the way to do that is to reverse some of these tax cuts that West and Stockwell Day brought in when Klein was the premier, and we were getting $8 billion a year in natural gas royalties. And that's what we need to do. Even if there's more money this year than there was last year, we can't forget the fact that we're still on a roller coaster. And maybe we're going up a little bit, but the higher up you go, the farther down you go, and the scarier it is. So I think we need to be careful as we approach this budget, because I think they do have some more money than they did a year ago. Nevertheless, we are still dependent on a roller coaster of royalty revenue to pay for our program expenditures, and that money should actually be invested for the future. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I have to say that after listening to that, I still don't know which way you go on the question you're being asked. Do we have a spending problem or revenue problem?
A structural revenue problem.
Did you all hear that? We have a structural revenue problem. All right, I'm now going to ask Carol to speak on behalf of, at least present on behalf of the Wildrose Party.
Let me start by saying that the Wildrose wrote and said they were very sorry they were not able to attend our forum today. I wrote and asked them to reconsider, since we had heard from one of their MLAs and had a very interesting conversation with her and thought they would add a great deal to this discussion, but I received no answer. So when we developed the rules for this forum, we were quite clear that if people did not show up, their place would be empty, and that I would try to present to the audience what is known of their position on the issue. So that's what I'll do. This is a very unusual position for me to be in, but most recent change is a good thing, right? The most recent quote I could get was this one: well, we don't need more taxes. We pay enough. We collect more taxation per person than any province in the country, and perhaps Dr. McMillan will speak to that later, because there's statistics, lies, and bad lies, right? Okay. And obviously in support of flat tax. Back one?
Oh, still on the, but you don't need more time?
No. Sorry. Can't see from the side, can't see with my glasses on either. So, and again, Danielle Smith saying that we've hit the sweet spot here in Alberta. Oh my. Yeah, we have a tax structure, both corporate and personal, that attracts those investment dollars here and attracts those high income earners here, and we wouldn't want to mess with that. With respect to the Premier's economic summary in Calgary a year ago, ideally what we'd like to see emerge from tomorrow's summit is a consensus agreement substantiated by the facts that Alberta's revenue mix is more than sufficient for all our needs. We don't need new taxes, and to slay the deficit we need to reduce government spending.
That's great.
Did you hear that?
Taxes and I'll say no, and they'll push and I'll say no. And
It's a famous political clip that's become political folklore.
read my lips.
If they're not going to be upfront with their plans, we're more than happy to tell Albertans what our plans are.
Danielle Smith and the Wildrose caucus are taking a page from George Bush's playbook, signing a pledge to not raise taxes or introduce new ones?
The Wildrose position is clear. No tax hikes. Period. We believe Albertans are taxed enough. We've got enough. We don't believe that we need to be hitting Albertans' pocketbooks for more. That's why today we're signing this pledge. We are drawing a clear line between our party and the PCs because we believe Albertans deserve to know where we stand. A new Wildrose government will not raise taxes. A new elected PC government, re-elected? Well, we're not so sure. I challenge Premier Redford to say definitively, one way or the other, what she believes when it comes to taxes. And I want her to put it in writing, just like we are.
So as far as I can honestly turn it on, right? As far as I can honestly report, that is the Wildrose position. So we can consider that when we ask questions and discussions and make decisions later. Thank you.
If I can interject just a little before the next speaker, if I'd had the mic while Brian was speaking, I would have called him up because what we heard was a lot of information about what government is doing, but not all that much about what the New Democrats were proposing. Yes. Now I forget who's next on the.
David.
All right, David. I might add that all three of our political speakers have been at SALT before, and we're delighted to welcome them back. Mr. Dorwood, the floor is yours.
And I am indeed privileged to be here today to spend a few minutes with you. And I am a candidate, I guess, for joining the organization very soon, as I just turned 62. So, and the last time I think I was here was in the mayor's race in 2010. So it's a pleasure. And I totally agree with Professor McMillan that this is exactly what should happen. And there's not enough discussion of financial matters amongst the electorate. And anything you can do in your own communities to encourage the discussion of financial matters is so needed in our world. In fact, in my humble opinion, because I'm a numbers guy, youth don't even get a good enough learning of numbers through their education that they have, in my opinion, such that they will be able to make informed decisions. And the more that we can, as citizens, rip apart these numbers and look at them and analyze them and provide feedback into them, the better it is. And governments need to hear the feelings of the electorate so that they will know the kind of decisions that need to be made. You know, I sat for years and years on the outside. Now I'm on the inside of the government, being an MLA, and I can assure you that there's a strong desire to get the scenario right. Let's talk about the words when I say that. Does Alberta have a spending or a revenue problem? You know, I tend to think of things in positive ways in the word, but I'm not afraid of the word problem. By the way, is everybody hearing okay? I see one gentleman that says no. Sir, would you like to come up really close at all? Yes, please. Would you mind coming up really close, because that's probably better for you. I just know, and feel free to just come within earshot of my, I hope you can hear better now. Does that help at all?
That's good.
Okay, good. You know, I tend to be a positive kind of a person rather than the negative, and so I've kind of assessed whether or not that word problem is a problem. And it's not. I'm not afraid of the word problem, but here's the hypothesis with respect to the words, does Alberta have a spending or revenue problem? You can actually take it both ways, and I've tested this, both on the revenue and expenditure side, because there are those who will say that we should reduce revenues and reduce expenditures, and there are those who say that we should increase the revenues and increase the expenditures, and all of the variations of that. There are actually individuals who say that we should increase the revenues but decrease the expenditures and save more for the future. And that's never a bad thing in our own, even in our own personal lives. So I like to change it just a little bit, and I would propose that the conversation could be about, does Alberta have a spending or a revenue opportunity being that the opportunity is getting the balance right between how much money we bring in the province of Alberta as your elected representatives in the government, and how much we spend. Are we bringing in the right amount, and are we spending the right amount, regardless of whether you think that's a higher or lower amount? The Minister of Finance, whose busy schedule couldn't be here, and the Premier asked me to come today to discuss these things with you. By way of background, I sit on Treasury Board, and so I'm somewhat familiar with the numbers because of that. And then my fiscal knowledge and background, and then I just tend to dabble into a bunch of areas that may come up today. So I hope I have some things to say in the question period. I'm looking forward to that. But I've got a big pad of paper, and most of my job today is to take information that you will pass to me through your questioning. And my pledge to you is to go back to the ministers for those questions that I don't have a direct answer myself, and go over that with them, for sure. I thought I would, in part of my time, that was the intro, probably used up 4 of my minutes. And I might get hacked because I didn't say too much about PC policy yet, right? But I did want to lay a little bit of groundwork for you in terms of what in Alberta this scenario is, because I find that sometimes people don't get the magnitude of what we deal with on a daily basis. So using the budget for 13-14, so it's the budget year that we're in right now. Understand the budget comes out in 2 weeks, and I obviously cannot talk about that. And also the third quarter update, which takes us to December 31st, is not released yet, so I can't talk about that either. So for reference, I'm using a budget of 13-14. Our income is approximately in the province $39 billion. Where does that come from? 25% of that comes out of the pockets of Albertans. So that's about $10 billion. So when Danielle Smith, the leader of the Wildrose opposition, she said no more taxes, which is what the Premier also said. She means that we're not going to take more than 25% of the amount that's brought into the province out of your pockets. We don't think it's good for the provincial government to dip more into the citizens' pockets and take money away. Corporate tax is about half of that, so about $5 billion. Other taxes were close to $5 billion, about $4.3 billion. Royalties are about $7.3 billion. So we don't get as much from royalties as we get from the income tax, which is personal income tax, which is $10 billion. And we get about $5 billion from the federal government in transfers from them, which equals about the amount of the corporate tax. And if you looked at all the money that we send to Ottawa for taxes, and you looked at all the income that comes back from Ottawa, you'd see there's a deficit there of the amount that stays in Ottawa to assist and support in their operations, plus go to other provinces. In the province of Alberta, what has the government chosen to spend that $40 billion on? I said $39 billion, I think. What have they chosen to spend that on? So $39 billion is spent in the province of Alberta every year. 44% of that is spent on, I'm sure you can guess, is spent on health. So we spend $17 billion of the $39 billion just on health. And of course, any seniors programs are included in that bucket of money. We spend $4.3 billion, or about 14% of the budget, on human services. So those are the support services for the individuals in the province that need the support from the government that is there for them. Education, and that's K to grade 12 education, gets $6.2 billion, which is 16%. And enterprise and advanced education gets about $2.7 billion. I have those numbers if anybody wants to go through those, but I thought I'd set the context because as we talk about whether we have a revenue problem or whether we have an expenditure problem or an opportunity, as I said, we can now go into some of those areas and say, well, I think that one there should be focused on, and it either should be increased or decreased depending on how you feel. How am I doing for time? About 2 more minutes, I suspect?
3 minutes. Go.
3 minutes, 2 minutes and 48 seconds. This fall, the Minister of Finance did a series of open houses and budget consultations, and he does that every year. I highly encourage you to attend and bring forward your ideas of those kind of budget consultations that are held. There's also an online survey. There was 2,173 people went online to give their thoughts, and 292 citizens were engaged in the budget consultations as they moved around the province. And some of the results are really interesting. It's all on a report called What We Heard. It's online on the Minister of Finance's webpage. So if you're interested, you can get into that. But 52% ranked spending on core services as their first priority. So individuals had 5 priorities of which service best meets your needs. What do you care the most about in the province of Alberta for spending? And 52% said that they wanted money spent on the core services that the province supports, mainly health, I'm sure. 44% of respondents indicated building infrastructure is their second priority. So it's really interesting to me because it meant that 52% of people ranked spending on core services. That doesn't surprise me. Of course, people are going to want core services. It did surprise me that 44% of respondents indicated building infrastructure is their second priority. The second question was, is there any areas you'd like to see funding on for programs or services increased, decreased, or stay the same? And K-9 education received support for increased funding from 58% of people. So 58% of the people thought we got to spend more money on our kids in schooling. Post-secondary was number 2, which received 55%. So 55% thought that advanced education should have money spent on more money spent on that. And that doesn't totally surprise me given the cuts that were made last year in their budget. So thanks very much. I hope that through the process of answering questions, I can bring up a few more facts and figures. It's really an honor to serve the people of Alberta, in particular the people that live in Goldbar, and do what I can to move the province forward and make sure it's the kind of wonderful place that it is today, and it always is that. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
You've got the material here.
Maybe Brendan, flip through these. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to consult, and Dr. McMillan, David, and Brian. I'm pleased to join you. So, Alberta, where did our money go? We're going to give you lots of facts and figures, and you decide for yourself, and I'll tell you what the Alberta Liberal position is. So, Brendan, we're going to have to go fast here. A lot of slides. The Alberta Liberals want to build a strong economy and strong society. We have a great economy. Let's look at certain facts. Now, the question is, do we have a revenue problem, spending problem, mismanagement problem, or all of the above? Okay, here are certain facts. Our economy is great. Oil is at, oh gosh, it's more than $100 a barrel. We have one of the best employment rates in the world. Highest incomes around, population is growing, and it's actually getting younger. Alberta's not getting older, we're getting younger. Businesses are making more money than ever. This is as good as it gets. Here's the facts. There's been an attack on the seniors, on you, the people that built this very province and country. Healthcare is costing more and the waits are longer. We have 1,000 fewer teachers today when we have 50,000 more children in the school system. We have the lowest post-secondary participation rate in the country and the highest house bill dropout rate and amongst the highest tuitions. And then you have attack on frontline workers and on the future pensioners. And a lot of deferred maintenance and infrastructure. So the excuse, last year was offered the bitumen bubble. Let's examine the bitumen bubble. The price of oil goes up and down. We all know that. The Alberta Liberals took the average price. Now, next one, Brendan. During the bitumen bubble speech, backward. Before the election, the government took an extreme price, said, hey, we're going to be washing billions. After the election, oops, we didn't see it coming. Everyone saw it coming. Economists all saw it coming. This is why you have to take an average price when you budget, not an extreme price. So the bitumen bubble speech was really a manufactured crisis to attack public programs. Let's start off with the Heritage Saving Trust Fund. I'm on that committee. Premier Lougheed put 30% of gas money away, oil and gas money away in the bank right off the bat. So you couldn't waste money, And if you had to pay for public programs, you use taxation dollars. Alberta put, it's the blue lines, $12.6 billion away in the Heritage Fund in about 1984. Today it's $16.8 billion. After 30 years of backbreaking work, we've saved nothing. But the economists will say you haven't accounted for inflation. If we account for inflation, we've actually saved $7 billion. And we've gone through the Sustainability Fund, and we've gone into debt. Let's talk about revenues. We took all the revenues from all sources from the last 10 years' budgets, put them into a graph. Most sources of revenues are stable. Personal income tax, right up here. It's gone up because more people are moving and the incomes are higher. Pretty stable. $10 billion. Corporate income tax, $5 billion. The one at the bottom that's unstable is Heritage Saving Trust Fund revenue because the stock market goes up or down. But the real squiggly line is non-renewables resource revenue. It's very unstable. And that's why Premier Lougheed said we shouldn't spend every cent we get. And we shouldn't, our public services should not rely on the price of a barrel of oil. Pre-2001, Alberta had progressive income tax. It was 44% of the federal tax brackets. So we did the math. Yes, we increased the basic personal exemption, but taxes on lower income folks used to be 7.48%. Taxes on higher income folks were 12.76%. You were sold a bill of goods, they're cutting your taxes. You know what? Alberta actually raised taxes on the lowest income and the middle income and lowered them on the wealthiest. That's what the flat tax was, a tax increase on you, a tax cut for the wealthiest. Corporate income taxes, I think Brian alluded, they used to be 15.5, they're 10% today. Small business tax was 6%, is 3%. We've had our royalty holidays until 2014. There'll be a lot of royalties coming in pretty soon. It's 1%, it's going to be 25%. It's been a race to the bottom on taxes in Alberta. Let's look at the national, how we do compare across the country. What, sorry? We took the flat tax we have in Alberta, we compared to the British Columbia progressive income tax. In Alberta, if you earn less than $125,000, you actually pay more taxes with a flat tax. The Alberta Liberals want to go to progressive income tax. We want to cut your taxes. And you know what? The guys at the top here, they can pay their fair share. They don't get to become billionaires without public education, public health care, and public roads. Across the country, Alberta is right here. We compare to every other province in the country. We said, well, the highest tax jurisdiction is Quebec. In Quebec, they tax the far right, they tax their citizens on the average $5,000 a year more. Saskatchewan, the darling of conservative politics, is right here. Premier Brad Wall, he taxes his citizens about $4,000 a year more than Albertans get taxed. BC is second lowest. They tax $3,000 per citizen more. Alberta has 4 million people. That would mean $12 billion more in taxes. We would still be the lowest in the country tied with BC. Alberta Liberals aren't even suggesting that we tied with BC. We have a lot of tax room here where we can still be competitive on taxes and bring more revenue in to pay for daily programs. And here's spending. Healthcare is $17 billion. Education is about $10 billion, all of education. Human services is about $5 billion. The reason I talk about healthcare is not because I'm a doctor and a bleeding heart liberal. I am a doctor and a bleeding heart liberal. But it's the #1 source of spending in the country. We took all the spending slides, budgets, for the last 10 years, and we put them into a slide. Let's debunk the myth that we have a spending problem. Well, here's every other ministry. There's 3 ministries that stand out. Of the high spending ministries with the spendings going up. This is social services. This is not welfare. It's AISH. It's, homelessness. It's that essential stuff where you gotta look after people who are in trouble. This is one of the most fundamental roles of government. Education, we go, holy cow, education has been flatlined in absolute dollars since 2008. Healthcare is going through the roof. Any smart aleck economists in the room? Well, the economist is going to say you didn't account for inflation. Brendan, let's show inflation. When we accounted for inflation, every other ministry has been cut. It got zero-based budget in 2009 after the economy dropped. Education has actually been cut since 2008 when you account for inflation. And then was delivered, I haven't even included the largest cut in decades, the $147 million cut. This actually sheds the government a good light because I haven't even accounted for population growth. To you I ask, who thinks we have a spending problem? We don't have a spending problem. Mismanagement, maybe. Let's look at the high spending ministry. Let's break that down. So we broke down healthcare. We took a long-term look. This is from Dr. Bob Aska from the School of Economics. Over 40 years, we were told healthcare wasn't sustainable in the early 90s. Healthcare and education was equal spending. And look at healthcare go through the roof in Alberta. Something happened over here that made healthcare spending go through the roof. Okay? Now, this is a slide from economists where you account for population growth and inflation. Healthcare and education and social services was severely cut, overcut in the 90s. Now, health management, I want to talk about health management. Alberta, we blew up a couple of hospitals. Blew up a hospital, sold a bunch of them for 10 cents on the dollar to private buddies and untendered contracts. And then Alberta started building hospitals. The rest of the country didn't blow them up, but they built some capacity. What do we do in Alberta? This is Dr. Duckett's slide, by the way. In Alberta, what do we do? Well, Alberta cut seniors' home care and seniors' programs, and other provinces invest in seniors. Guess what happened to the seniors in our province? Take a guess. Well, you guessed it. ALC is alternate level of care. It is how many people who shouldn't be in hospital spend in hospital. I don't like the word bed blockers, but we have 500 people today plugging up the most expensive bed on the planet at $1,200 a night. These are the number of days, 60,000 days in the Calgary Health Region alone, people who shouldn't have been in hospital at $1,200 a night. 500 people, you do the math, it costs you $500,000 a year. That's $250 million in keeping people in the wrong place. That causes all the cancellation of all the surgeries, causes the whole ER crisis, causes the cities to increase the number of ambulances on the street. All we needed to do was invest in home care. Let's double, triple, quadruple up the home care like the Danish do. So much home care you actually don't need to be in the hospital. And if you need long-term care, we do need some long-term care. It's been healthcare mismanagement. Health spending is up 43% since 2007. Population gone up 15%. AHS has gotten 62% extra in healthcare since 2007. Where's the money gone? We got too many managers managing managers. You've seen lots of examples of mismanagement. Brendan, we're going to have to go real quick here because we're running out of time. Healthcare mismanagement leads to longer waits, more suffering, increased debt, cuts to every other ministry, especially programs that are important to you, and more taxes and fees for working families. Working families are paying the price. What's wrong with our situation? Revenue, spending, or mismanagement? Or all of the above? The Alberta Liberals think it's all of the above, actually. And I've given you evidence to that effect. So what's our solution? Smarter government, let's pace our growth, open public tendering our contracts, let's not waste money, sustainable funding, let's invest in people in the communities. And I need to steal 30 more seconds. Let's raise revenue. Let's do a forensic audit of our royalties. Royalty holiday's over. Let's deal with the environmental issues, get our pipelines to the coast, tidewater. Let's upgrade our bitumen, and let's talk taxes. Stop wasting money. We can save $500 million. We can deliver better healthcare for $1 billion less. We need a forensic audit of healthcare money. Liberal solution, let's go back to progressive income tax. That'll raise some money and cut taxes on you. Let's touch corporate tax just a little bit. Let's look at linear taxes and let's bring in a carbon tax. We deal with carbon, President Obama will want our pipeline, and the Europeans will want our product. And I think we're almost done. Alberta is filthy wealthy, my friends. Your money's being wasted. It's being mismanaged. You are being overtaxed, and the wealthiest being undertaxed. Thank you. I look forward to the questions.
Dr. McMillan, do you want to cap that?
Politicians are a hard act to follow. They're all pretty good at public speaking and all very convincing. Let me just try to summarize and highlight a few things. First of all, and I think today it's been useful in the sense that people have referred to facts, okay, and actually used some numbers and must be holding this. Is that any better? Yeah. Get this. Okay. they've actually used some numbers, and that's very useful. Gives us some, you know, better than more and less and so on. So I think that that's very valuable, and people have provided good insights here and extremely useful. Let me just say a couple things about what has been said, and I'll try and do it in a relatively generic way. David and Raj particularly have outlined the problems that you face when you look at, you know, are we going to raise revenues? Are we going to cut spending? What are the options that are there before us? And these are difficult choices. I mean, it's nice to sit in the ivory tower as an academic and not have to deal with these kinds of real world issues. And these are the people that have to deal with those kinds of real world issues. And they're not easy. You know, you have to sell these messages to the public who are going to vote for you or against you, as the cases may be. So that's a very useful looking at these alternatives and understanding, you know, what does it mean? What does it mean? I'm really sorry that the Wildrose people didn't show up. You know, Carol did a good job, but there's something more that the Wildrose stands for. No new taxes and balanced budgets. And the question it comes down, okay, if you're not going to raise taxes and you're going to balance the budget, how are you going to do it? Well, there's only one way, and that's to cut spending. So where are you going to cut? Tell us what your budget is going to look like. And it's easy to lament all the cuts that are being made here and there by government, but you're not telling us what you're going to do when you're there. So we're not finding out what that option is. Raj has some interesting ideas on the healthcare, and I think those deserve to be explored. I'm not a healthcare economist, and although I dabble a little bit in it, it's hard to avoid when it's almost half your budget. But I would really be interested in seeing the development of those kinds of ideas and see how we can do better in particular with our healthcare budget. And I think a lot of other people would be interested too. Brian brought up among many good points, Brian brought up this issue of volatility of natural resource revenues, and I think that's, you know, this has been a fundamental issue that Albertans have had to deal with, even prior to Premier Lougheed. But it's interesting in the sense that we go back to 2000 or so, and we established a sustainability fund, which was supposed to even out these ups and downs. Well, it did a really good job, and I would be the first to admit, I've been critical of the provincial finances many times, but they did a really good job of saving money in the sustainability fund. And when the crash came in 08, 09, and recession and continued on into 2010, they used that money to continue government spending and to continue supporting the economy. We built a lot of infrastructure with that sustainability fund money and deficit finance. The problem is that the economy recovered very quickly, but we continued to draw on the sustainability fund and spend it away. So it's almost gone, and we're borrowing money besides. So we're in a very difficult situation. In fact, I look back at it and say, you know, the sustainability fund worked well, but we didn't wean ourselves from it. And we're in a difficult situation now of having exhausted our bank account and also facing increasing debt. And to me, it looks like we're getting into the beginning of the Getty years, when we started to accumulate debt. And I hope we're not going there, and I hope we're not looking to another Ralph Klein to have to do the nasty things that were done during the Ralph Klein years to get us out. Thank you very much.
minute to talk about this pamphlet, which I believe everyone has. If you don't, there are more on the table there. It occurred to me when we were thinking about this subject that most of us don't really know what kinds of cuts have happened over the last quarter century. Because I can tell you, 20 years ago, I wasn't paying any attention to what was happening to the Alberta senior benefits. And now I'm not tracking what happens to childcare or to primary education. So I put together from the data that I have, because my obsession is elder care, a track of what's happened to Alberta seniors benefits. So you could see a concrete example of how services have been cut in the last 25 years. And most people, even those who are reasonably knowledgeable about seniors issues now, didn't know that in 1973 there was a program that covered our dental and eyeglass costs, or that our farm care costs have been covered since 1970 at much less user pay proportion than we have now. So it's not that we're asking for things we didn't have. In fact, in some ways, I'd be happy if we could go back to what we had in 1980 before they started cutting them. But you will be able to track what's been happening. You can do the same sort of chart in any other area if you did the research. And there are people here who are knowledgeable enough to do that. And I think it helps when we're talking about, do we have a spending problem, if we can see actually what has been happening to our public services. That cost is not gone, you know. That cost is being paid by those who can afford it. Most of us can't. So that's something else for you to think about during the break. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. We'll take a 5-minute break and start up again with after 3:15. Wish to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand, and I'll try to recognize you in the order I see you. And I'll remind you that you get 90 seconds, no more. Yes, the lady down here in the light brown jacket.
Hello, I'm Daphne Wallace, Second Vice President of the United Nurses of Alberta. Not quite a senior yet, but my husband is. Anyway, very interesting discussion. I just have a couple of comments to make. First, with regards to the comments about the finance minister having open houses and wanting input. That may be very, very true, that he's had these open houses. I've certainly written letters to my MLA about some situations that are happening in Alberta right now, and I haven't had the dignity of a response. So there may be open houses, but I don't think there's much credence put to what the citizens and taxpayers of Alberta are telling the government. I really appreciated the comments on healthcare because I am a registered nurse and have worked as a registered nurse for almost 40 years. And up until 3 months ago, I was a frontline worker, working 12-hour night shifts at Foothills Hospital in Calgary. So I know firsthand what one of the major problems is with the increase in expenditures in healthcare, or a couple. One is, as Raj said, is the management. We've got more managers today than we ever had. It would be nice to know what to do. And we don't need to be an economist to understand some of the issues. We have patients, and bed blocker is not a nice term, but it is a common term, that are waiting long-term care placement or home care. They're discharged into the communities or long-term care or extended care facilities long before they are ready to. Oftentimes in private for-profit facilities with inadequate and untrained staff. And this results in complications, further illnesses that result in readmission to acute care facilities costing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year. As frontline workers, we have been saying for years that it's not just long-term care beds, it's the continuum of care. Care in the community, care in long-term care, care in extended care facilities. In seniors' homes, we've got to have the proper placement, we've got to have the proper people taking care of those patients and citizens. And I don't think that the progressive Conservative government is hearing the concerns of the citizens of this province.
Gentleman over here on my right.
I'm Neil Evans, angry, disillusioned senior citizen of Alberta. I think there's no question about the policies of the government of Alberta. They are designed to protect the tax interests of the rich in this province. What we've got is an absolutely shameful record when it comes to long-term care, seniors, benefits, health, other health issues, education, overcrowded classrooms. Anybody who thinks that conditions in schools today are what they were 10 or 20 years ago ought to go find out, because there has been a deterioration. Why should we think of ourselves as proud Albertans? It has nothing to do with the interests of this government, of the PC party, in social justice, fairness, equity. These are values that have disappeared from their consciousness. And I, for one, am very upset about it. I'd like to recommend that everybody pick up or go online and read the current issue of Wildrose, where there is a very informative article on tax issues in Canada, and where the author quotes the author of a book called "Tax is Not a Four-Letter Word." The author of this book alleges that the 30-year struggle of the far right to reduce the size of government, to get government out of our lives, has been won. We've let them win. It's time to renew the struggle and take that victory away from them.
Let's see, lady in the white sweater.
Hi, my name's Kelly. I've lived in Edmonton my whole life, and I have a question for Mr. Dorwood. Hi. Hi there. I would like to know your opinion of Premier Peter Lougheed's government's royalty rates, what they demanded from companies to extract our resources, the rates that they require. I'd like to know your opinion about them.
You know, it's a balance issue, and it's a tough one. And Premier Stelmach did a review of the royalty rates prior to him becoming the Premier, and things did not turn out very well with respect to that. And he made changes in the early part of his leadership relative to the companies coming back and the furor over whether or not those changes that were made at that time were the correct ones. I can tell you that I'm on the front line of working with businesses who are considering coming to Alberta. And in Alberta, we have two big negatives for companies coming: the costs of construction and the operating costs downstream. We have incredible positives, which are a stable government of a close proximity to markets, to a situation. Excuse me, they.
Okay,
we can talk after.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Raj and Brian, see if they have comments as well.
Thanks very much. I don't think I have the same take on what happened with Ed Stelmach's royalty review as David does. They did get into some flack from the oil companies, but it was after the price of oil dropped, and then of course the drilling rigs, and it's always cyclical. The drilling rigs, and I think the other thing was a little bit of a capital strike. It was a little bit of the companies shutting down their operations to put pressure on the government. But it wasn't until about a year later, when the price of oil dropped, that there was such a significant impact on drilling and conventional oil and gas in the province. So it was, the government made changes, but when David said it wasn't a very good experience, it wasn't a very good experience for the government, because the oil industry transferred their allegiance and their finances to the Wildrose party, and creating a major headache for this government.
David, with all due respect, I got to disagree. The price of oil went from $147 a barrel to $33 a barrel. As you know, the price of gas went from $14 to $2. Our best customer went bankrupt, and we had a major international banking crisis. Suddenly banks wouldn't lend corporations money. And other things that made it difficult for business is there is a lot of red tape, but it doesn't actually achieve the protections of the environment and the society that we need to. And it actually hurts business. Their input costs are high because of a lot of silly rules. And also, government has dropped the ball on the environment. Because we don't have independent monitoring of the environment, because our credibility and integrity is at risk, our neighboring partners don't want our pipelines and product to go through their areas to get to market. We were one vote shy of Europe boycotting our product because we've dropped the ball on the environment. And also, the input costs for business are expensive because there's lack of skilled labor. Now, we have a lot of injured workers, not injured at work through WCB. They're Albertans who are sick or injured through life. And when you're waiting for a hip or knee replacement for 2 years, industry is paying disability insurance. You're losing your skill. It's not good for you as an individual and family. The education system does not meet the education needs of our society. Our kids are dropping out in record numbers. Look, you don't all have to be doctors and PhDs and economists. We do need boilermakers and plumbers. And the cost of education is so much, especially if you're a family in a small town or a low-income family that lives in town. Well, you got 4 kids, they got to pay room and board, $1,000 a month, and $7 grand a year tuition. Our kids are saying, you know what? I'd rather get a $15, $20 an hour job. It was very simplistic to say it was the royalties. It wasn't the royalties. It was all these other factors combined that actually affected industry. Because we have the citizens. They just need to get an education system that gets them the skills and trades and lifelong learning. It's not just for the kids. It's for 30, 40-year-olds. It's for women returning to the labor workforce. If we actually had good public daycare, many parents, majority of them women, can work part-time. Just simple things like that would actually help business, help industry, help reduce their costs of doing business in this province, and improve the lives of citizens.
Thank you, Raj. Annika? You have 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Can you understand me? Am I holding it in the right way? Yeah. I am mad like hell, to put it mildly. And I have about 73 questions, but I will do one. And it's for you, the representative of the Progressive Conservative Party. And I want to tell you, I want a refund for that trip that Iris Evans made to Norway. And I want it now, because I want to know, what did she learn on a trip to Norway? Why are we so stupid and blindfolded in our government management with the resources we have? Why can we not learn from other countries? Norway, that is the leader in social democracy. Give me the refund now as a taxpayer. Where is the stuff you have learned from that trip? It was a few years ago, and it's overdue.
Well, I will give you my card after, and I will talk to Iris Evans, because I need to talk to her about something else. She's no longer an MLA, but I will call her, and I will ask her about that, and then I'll respond back to you, because I don't know the answer to that. But I will find out, and then can we communicate, and I'll get the answer for you?
That's not a good answer now.
Well, I apologize, but I must say that I don't make up phony baloney answers, and I don't give phony baloney stuff. I deal with the facts as I know them, and I don't know the answer to that, ma'am, but I will find out for you what the purpose of that trip was and all that, and I hope it helps them. And then you'll only have 72. And I might even take a couple more of those and try them on for size 2.
Thank you, Dave. Just a moment.
I'd like to respond. I was there when Iris went to Norway, and she went to study royalties. And of course, she didn't report back what she found, which is that royalties in Norway are very much higher than they are in Alberta. And not only that, they've been accumulating the royalty revenue. All of it goes into the fund. It's not spent on program spending. And they have now a fund which is modeled precisely on Peter Lougheed's Heritage Fund, by the way, of $600 billion. And it's all invested out of Norway so that it doesn't distort their economy. And it has raised Norway's standard of living and the level of services they receive to amongst the highest in the world. So that's what she didn't tell us when she came back. I also went on a royalty trip though, about 5 years ago. I flew up to Alaska, to the capital Juneau, and I met with lawmakers on both sides of the House, and I got briefed by the governor's staff, and I met the governor of Alaska at that time, and they had gone through a process of reevaluating their royalties, and they looked at Alberta very closely, and they looked at other jurisdictions, and they raised their royalties quite a bit. The oil companies, of course, said we're leaving and we're never coming back, but they're still there now. And interestingly, at $100 a barrel, Alaska now charges 62% more royalties at $100 a barrel price than we do here in Alberta. Now that was brought in under a governor whose name was Sarah Palin. And I want to ask this question. If a gun-toting, Bible-thumping, right-wing Republican can get fair value for royalties, what the hell's wrong with our people? And I have a picture with her on my webpage.
You know, I'm just going to add to what Brian said. First of all, what they should do is just take a car ride or LRT ride down to the University of Alberta, because we got some of the best brains in the world right here, and they'll give them the international evidence of what are best practices and who does what. If you want to travel outside of Alberta, go to Newfoundland, go to Alaska, go to the elected members in Alberta who are here, who are in the Premier Lougheed government, even before you go to Norway. Now, with respect to travel, in absolute dollars, these are very expensive first-class flights, even Premier's travel, but it's not a lot of money. But what it is, it's a symbolic measure. When the leaders behave that way, you demoralize the rest of the team that actually builds the province, which is the frontline staff. In Alberta Health Services, when the managers and the minister and the big people are sitting at the trough, the morale of the doctors is 31%, the morale of the nurses, the rest of the staff, probably the hardest working, best staff in the country, or if not the world, is 58%. And they won't even report it anymore. When you demoralize staff, your stress levels go up, your cortisol level is high. As a physician, you don't need to be a doctor to understand this. You're going to get sick, your body's going to break down, you don't have enough staff, whether it's teaching, whether it's healthcare, in any of the social services fields, where you're looking after human beings, suddenly your costs are going to go up because of sickness. And lastly, people do their best and they still show up to work on time and leave on time, but your productivity drops when the leaders live like kings and queens, while Albertans are expected to take less. So not only is it royalties, but it's the whole thing. It's a behavior of elected peoples who aren't enlightened anymore. Thank you.
Irene?
We've heard how regressive and unfair and unjust the flat tax is. So I'm wondering, Mr. Dorman, what are you doing towards getting rid of that regressive tax?
The word regressive and flat are not exactly the same, but a regressive tax is one that penalizes people in the lower end. Folks, I really would like in 90 seconds to answer the question. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do. And when I mean, if you have a disagreement with what I'm saying, I appreciate that. But chewing up the time is, I don't think, going to be the right way to handle it. I'm just telling you facts. I understand taxation. I'm trying to say that flat tax is quite the opposite of a regressive tax. In fact, in Alberta, somebody who earns $18,000 pays zero Alberta tax. A single taxpayer in a home does not pay any Alberta tax on $36,000. So there is no tax. We have a two-rate tax, 0 and 10%. I won't personally be doing anything with respect to the flat tax. There's no indication from a lot of people out there. There was nobody that discussed the tax regime being the flat tax or the two-rate system, 0 and 10. this fall at those forums. So if there's an overwhelming support to look at that regime, I'm sure the minister will do that, but we have not heard that in a big, huge way.
I got to respond to this. It's turning into a debate. David, with all due respect, you're an accountant, so your whole life and career is about tax deferral, tax loopholes, and tax cuts for the wealthiest. Okay? You got an H&R Block. The majority of working families got an H&R Block. I've given you evidence that the flat tax is actually a tax increase for the low income and middle income. And that's your tax cut. There's the evidence that was given. That's a regressive tax because it punishes the very people that drive the economy, the middle income families and regular working families. Second, the other regressive taxes are school fees, which are like university tuition. High cost of tuition in the wealthiest place. These are regressive taxes. You know what? Going after the seniors in the drug program, it's a tax on the sick. That's a regressive tax. Right. These are regressive taxes. And we need to put the word progressive back into this province, and that's what the Alberta Liberals aim to do. David, I don't mean any disrespect on a personal level, but would you reference that you're an accountant, and I'm not an accountant?
Well, I don't think we need to personalize this. I think the politics of it is what's important. And in my view, a flat tax is an extremely regressive tax, because what happened was, although they increased the personal exemption, what they actually did was increase the marginal tax rate on middle income people. And they now pay a lot more tax than they used to pay. And I gave the numbers, some sample numbers, at the same time cutting taxes on the very wealthiest. So in my view, it is a regressive tax. A progressive tax is defined as one in which there are increasing levels of taxation as your income rises. That is a progressive tax. A flat tax is not a progressive tax. And I don't accept at all that it's that you could call it anything else but regressive.
I recommend that everybody read the Parkland Institute released a paper today, and they talk very clearly, and I certainly hope Doug Horner will read it and take heart to do with the taxing situation. And also, one other item I would recommend is in England they're promoting this. It's called the Robin Hood tax, and it's to do with really the way the tax system now has made the rich richer and the poor poorer, and the division between. So I think I see Alberta as going exactly the same way as Britain, and we're wasting money on all these P3 infrastructure buildings, paying probably 3 times the cost that we should be paying. I don't know if those people who had the good fortune to see Alison Pollock from England, PIA brought her here, and talk very clearly, and we really are following the British race to the bottom, both in tax and in P3 infrastructure.
You're talking about healthcare as one of the biggest expenditures that will come out this year, and 17 billion has always been a significant number. And of course, everybody's noted how that $17 billion hasn't necessarily reflected in better outcomes in the health system. I just wanted to kind of note that before this last year's budget in 2013, Stephen Lockwood asked the frontline staffs in all departments to cut $180 million in find savings, which ultimately always translate into cuts. And after the budget, they asked for a further $200 million. And then, of course, during the budget, we didn't get what we were supposed to get. We went down to 3% as opposed to 4.5% that we were supposed to get. So my question to you is, in terms of having that budget and having less than preferable outcomes in our healthcare system with wait times and all the staff that we saw laid off in this year, and surgical beds closed in the summer, and beds overall closed, and rural services, an entire attrition of rural services in this province. Where has the money gone, the $17 billion? And where will it be going? We have $1.03 billion coming into the budget this year from health transfers, and we want to see that reflected in this budget. But if we don't have any accountability, how is that going to be ensured? Because healthcare impacts everybody. It impacts seniors, it impacts young people, it impacts absolutely everybody. So we want to know where that money has gone.
Thanks for that question. Well, one thing I can talk about is the $1 billion. Please understand that no government would sit back and say, well, the federal government owes us $1 billion on the health transfer more, so we're going to spend $1 billion less in the health world because of that. Albertans didn't get penalized because the federal government chose to not send us as much money as might have been fair. So in negotiation with the federal government, we get the $1 billion. I think the government's already on the record saying that the $1 billion isn't necessarily going to transfer back right into the health system for that reason. Per capita spending on health expenditures, so that's the amount of money that's spent by the government on a per capita basis for you as individuals, is the second highest in Canada. The highest is Newfoundland. They spend about $5,300 a person per capita. Alberta spends $4,600 a person. That's the 2012-2013 numbers. So we do spend a lot of money on healthcare. Are we very efficient with it? I don't know that you can spend $17 billion and be totally efficient. I do know that Minister Horn wants to become more efficient and is working hard to have that happen. We talk about it all the time in caucus, and he talks with me about it on occasion because I kind of get that side of it. I think over time we will become better with the spending of that money. I can tell you that if there's anybody that could just walk in and identify so easily an area and say, we're just going to change that, and boom, all the problems are solved, and we'll have no wait times, and it'll be wonderful. Believe me, there's no reason why anybody would not want to have that happen. We don't do this for the reasons of not wanting things to work efficiently. Should we continue always to make sure that that $17 billion is the right amount of money to spend, or should we spend more? And is it being spent efficiently? We continue to try to, as I can tell you, people across the world do. I mean, this is not your exact same question is a valid question, whether we're sitting here or in Moncton or in Victoria or in fact in the United States, who are trying to grapple with having a system where there is not accessible health care for everybody. So it's a worldwide issue about how you can control healthcare costs. I have a graph here somewhere, I can't take the time to look at it, but healthcare costs were growing at a graph like this. It would have, if we didn't rein in and work hard to try to control that would blow right through 17 billion into the 26 and 27 billion dollar range. And personal taxes brought in an additional bring in now $10 billion. If our healthcare costs, and they were going like that, they could have increased by 10 billion. Does anybody in this room want to have double the taxes that they pay to the Alberta government? I don't think so. So we really need to rein in the spending and find ways to make sure that it doesn't continue to get bigger and bigger every year.
Thanks very much. Well, yesterday, David Egan and I, David is our health critic, released a 5-point plan for the $1 billion in additional health transfers for healthcare. And we took a position that could be retained within healthcare and not spent on roads or some other programs. And we identified 5 major areas. First of all, to improve drug coverage for seniors and low-income Albertans. And I don't have the numbers with me. Second, more training and education to increase the number of healthcare professionals, including doctors, nurses, and others. Major infusion for our mental health, which is a huge deficiency in our province. Additional long-term care beds, 1,500 long-term care beds, and new provincial lab services so that we can avoid this major privatization that's now underway. This is perhaps the largest privatization in our healthcare system in Alberta history that's now being conducted by Fred Horn and Allison Redford. They're going to contract out all of the medical lab services in Edmonton to potentially an American company that's been has a very, very bad reputation for doing unnecessary tests and so on, and the cost to the government is going to be enormous. That's a $3 billion request for proposal. So some of that money could be put into upgrading our labs here and retaining them under public control. So that's something that I think we can do. In terms of fixing healthcare and finding savings, I think there's lots of savings to be found. First of all, get rid of AHS. You have a duplicate bureaucracy. You have actually two bureaucracies now. You have the Ministry of Health, and then you have Alberta Health Services, which is set up in a corporate model by Rockin' Ronnie Lightford when he was the health minister. And it's got corporate executives running the show. And that's not the appropriate model. So we would get rid of it altogether, and we could find huge savings. Another example is if we did bulk buying for our pharmaceuticals and negotiated with the big drug companies for the lowest possible price, as they do in New Zealand, we could save over $100 million in the first year. So there are ways to save money, but it's not by privatization, and it's not by cutting frontline services.
I love talking about healthcare. First, I'd like to talk about tax. I think Russia has a flat tax. Well, I don't know how many other countries in the world have flat tax, but Russia has a flat tax. And on taxes, because our education system does not meet the needs of its citizens, our policies are very regressive, the temporary foreign worker policies, and let's fly a couple plane loads in and live in camps policies. Their taxes are paid somewhere else in the country, and the money is spent somewhere else in the world. There is a flight of capital and tax dollars from Alberta across the world, across the country. There's a lot of tax revenue that's lost there. I have given you healthcare expenditure. I've given you facts and evidence. This is how you fix healthcare, David. Somebody who can take notes. The acute care system cannot function if it's plugged up by people who shouldn't be there. So we looked at all the data. When people go to long-term care, 50% die within 2 years. So we said, there are beds coming up in Edmonton and Calgary. So who goes into those beds? 80% of the people were coming from home, because there's such inadequate home care. So if you want to fix health care, this is how you fix it. Home care, home care, home care, home care, home care, non-profit, community-based home care. Call in the Red Cross and the Victoria Order of Nurses to get them the RNs and LPNs and nursing aides that they need that are regulated professionals. We also need to invest in subacute care, rehab care, community-based palliative and hospice care. We actually don't need that much long-term care. We don't. A lot of people who are waiting in hospital don't all need long-term care. Many of them can just go home if you decline home care. I advise the Ontario government, Deb Matthews, not to build long-term care. I said you'll save on capital and operational if you just invest massively in home care. Or bring in accountability measures. That's exactly what Ontario did. They saved $500 million on capital and long-term care, and $500 million a year on operational long-term care. Within the same amount of money envelope, they provided better services for 50% more seniors because it was non-profit. And Alberta just gave all the profit, home care, long-term care home care dollars, most of them to those Ontario companies that the Ontario government is not giving contracts to. Okay, that's to get people out of the system and stop them from coming in. Number two, let's integrate the primary care networks. FCCs, call them what you want, and the family doctor's got to be the backbone of your care. They got to be the backbone of your care. Let's integrate them into the hospital acute care system. And have a collaborative multidisciplinary team. Us doctors can't do our job if we don't have nurses, nurse practitioners, the whole health team. The whole same team should look after you in the hospital, in the community. They should look after your whole clan. You take your body and your family to the same mechanic in the same shop. Why would you take your body and your family to the same mechanic in the same shop? The problem is the further fragmentation of healthcare. That's the problem. If family doctors could admit patients to the same hospital, they would look after you. They wouldn't order all the tests that are being ordered. Because right now you're being cared for subspecialists who don't have a relationship with you. They over-order, they over-consult, and they're billing specialty fees for doing bread and butter work that good family doctors can do. And they're training the next generation to be specialists, and the urban family doctors don't know what serious is anymore because they don't work in acute care. There's a comprehensive approach to healthcare. That's why you need true performance accountability measures.
Wow. I think we have time for one more question.
I have two more questioners here.
All right. Two quick ones.
comment. I'm old enough to remember what life was like in this province when we didn't have senior services, when we didn't have health care. When my first child was born, my husband and I had to pay the doctor, not the hospital, but the doctor. When I started working after that child was a year old, I was so glad I was able to pay taxes, because I understood by that time that no longer would the community have to raise money to build a school or maintain the school. That no longer would the community have to volunteer to put in a telephone system or an electrification system. That no longer would I have to pay the doctor when I needed to see one, or not see a doctor when I couldn't pay one. So I think one of the things that we should think about is, why do we pay taxes? Why should we pay taxes? And it's not just me, because I want to live in a community where people don't go hungry or homeless or without health care or without addictions care or without good roads to drive on or schools to go to or anything else. So maybe we have to think about why we're paying taxes, and then we have to decide which taxes we think are worth paying, and then we have to work out how we're going to pay for them. That's the way we do it at home. When our car needs repaired, we don't say, oh dear. We work out how we can pay to make that happen. So maybe that's where we need to start. And I'd be interested at some future date to hear from you. Why do you think we should pay taxes? What should we pay for? And then let's go from there.
I gather the Progressive Conservative Party is not going to consider increasing taxes for citizens. I gather it's not going to consider increasing royalties. I gather it's not going to consider increasing business taxes. How do you, is the only way the problem of expenditures exceeding revenues going to be solved is by further cuts? How do you propose to bridge this gap that Dr. McMillan has made so clear to us today?
That's a good question.
Great question, thank you. With respect to the personal and the corporate taxes, no, there are no plans to increase those. With respect to the royalties, as Mr. Mason already pointed out, the royalties naturally increase here soon in the next 3-4 years. What happened was the royalty regime that was put into place years ago allowed the oil companies to be able to recover a portion of their capital investment into the province, which was a necessary thing in order to encourage them to come, quite frankly. Notice that Saskatchewan, for example, doesn't have a bitumen situation whereby they have royalties from that at all, because they didn't have the investment. I'm not criticizing Saskatchewan. Their heavy oil is their oil sands are way under the ground, further than ours. There are other reasons. But the royalty regime was necessary in order to encourage the companies to come and make those capital investments. Those come off, and those deals come off, and so there's more royalty money going to come into the province in the future.
So we're going to become forever dependent upon oil revenues. And we can look forward to much the same as we've got now.
I think the number that we have in, as I stated, was about $7 billion. If tomorrow the world did not need any more oil, we would not have the $7 million. And clearly, in order to have the same amount of service, we would have to find another source for that $7 million. That's clear. I mean, there's nothing else you can do. That's not forecast, what I just said. And therefore, we probably should be okay. If this was 2.5 weeks from right now, I'd be in a better position to talk about it, because Minister Hunter would have released the budget that he's going to in 2 weeks. It'll be a very interesting budget for everybody to see in Alberta, and you'll see a 4-year plan in that budget going forward. So if you have any questions or want to go through that budget, contact me and we can do that. That's a very good question, and I appreciate it's a balancing thing. You're absolutely right. Does that help?
My name is Elaine Fleming. I'm from Edmonton. This is just a question that nobody's going to have time to answer it, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask this on behalf of everybody that I know who's under 35, who would probably put this question to you, John. and this is for all of you to think about, and everybody here, if one of the major problems is the volatility of our non-renewable resources, of the prices, or our reliance on those non-renewable resources, is there any forward thinking in terms of alternatives for the development of our economy?
Oh man, since I was in high school in Bonnie Doon in 1969, we've been talking in the province about diversification of our economy. The answer is yes. We all were, even the opposition parties, everybody, we want to find ways to have more revenue come into the government coffers and to be able to be there when the non-renewable resource revenue goes down. We struggle to find exactly what that is. There's some good things happening in agriculture, byproducts down in southern Alberta for the most part, and creating those kind of revenues from those sources. But that is talked a lot about inside the government, almost on a daily basis. And there's no magic bullet that solves that problem of where that next amount of revenue is going to come from.
Elaine, you raised a very important point. On the energy sector, we do need to diversify our markets and build value in the current energy sector that we currently have, which means give incentives for more upgrading here at home, more value-add jobs. But we need to diversify beyond just oil. And the key is knowledge-based industries, innovation and technology, research and development. I showed you the evidence on education spending, and our greatest resource isn't what's in the ground, it's what's above the ground. It's our children. It's the knowledge that they can gain in their brains and what they can do with that knowledge. That's why it's important. The Alberta Liberals will do the largest investment in Alberta history from early childhood development to K-12 education to post-secondary in Canadian history. Because we know in order to bring that next economy, the next billion-dollar idea, it's going to be done here in Alberta. Well, we have to invest in that today. By cutting it today, we have just put our future economy at risk. So we would not only reverse the cuts, we would invest heavily to put us back on the trajectory to before 2008. Even Premier Klein understood that, hey, he had to invest in education. Since Premier Klein left, we've actually been starving education. I gave you evidence and facts and data. We need to get these 1,000 teachers back into the school system. Our teachers need the support in the classroom for the kids. We need the wraparound services. Let's build our schools as community hubs. Research and development is the key. It's all education.
Thanks. I don't have time to give you the full accounting of the New Democrats' plan for diversifying the economy, but I will just mention one thing, and that has to do with energy. First of all, the first point I want to make is that we need to make sure that we are upgrading the bitumen in Alberta as much as possible. And that creates good long-term jobs. Pipelines create temporary construction jobs, but take very few people to operate them. And if we're just scooping the stuff up and sending it to the Gulf Coast or sending it to China, we're sending jobs and billions of dollars of value-added investment with it. So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is we need to invest in renewable energy. There will come a time when the rest of the world will make decisions about the use of hydrocarbons for fuels, and including Alberta's, and those will not be decisions we get to make here. And unless we prepare now to build an energy economy that is different from the hydrocarbon economy, we are going to end up as a ghost province. And I think that that's the lack of vision that I see in this government right now, is that they don't see that coming. It will get here, it might be 10 years or 20, but it's coming.
Okay. I'm going to bring this to a close. We started out with a question: does Alberta have a revenue problem or a spending problem? And I think the answer was yes. I would like to thank, first of all, our speakers, Dr. Sherman, Mr. Mason, Mr. Dorwood, Professor McMillan. You're going to get out of here with appreciation and whole skins, and I hope you're agreeable to being invited back at some point in the future. And I would also like to thank our audience. We'll certainly be trying this again. There's a number of unfamiliar faces, and I take great pleasure in inviting you to come and join us at one of our regular meetings, the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. And we're in the classroom B, which is just across the hall here. I see a question.
May I ask for a show of hands for